Let's review the Data-Driven Advisor Cash Flow Forecaster. The first page we get to is the inputs page. All of the inputs are contained on one page. You start with a name and date of birth. It calculates the age, and you have to put a maximum age that everybody will live to. We can put in expected annual inflation. I like to keep it at 0 inflation, but that's my personal preference. We can put how much money somebody is spending, what age they start spending at, and does their spending change at a late age or not. Some people like to use a lower late age spending, some people don't. You can also use gradual late age spending at a certain age. Their spending will drop by 7% per year for a few years, and it goes down to 110,000, just different ways to drop spending over time. Then we get to savings. A lot of people are still working. Other savings, retirement savings, you can change the names of these and they will populate. So for this client, we're assuming that Yoko will be saving $15,000 per year starting at age 60, ending at age 65. We are inflation adjusting that. We're assuming neither of them have retirement savings. We're assuming that John has a pension that kicks in at age 60 and ends at age 80. These might be ridiculous assumptions, but I just want to show you some of the things that the cash flow forecaster is capable of thinking of. We can also have some deferred work, which we have nothing for them, adding in Social Security, the dollar amount and when it's claimed, 10 different one-time items for expenses or incomes per year. Then we come down here, we can look at charity for a charity tax write-off. Are they a single filer, yes or no? What's their state taxes? And are you adjusting tax brackets for inflation? Over long periods of time, tax brackets do get adjusted, so I suggest keeping that at yes. Then down here in the real estate section, we have a place for 4 different real estate investments. You can choose to show whether you want to sell real estate eventually or not. You can put in the value for that real estate, the mortgage amount, original term of the mortgage and years remaining, mortgage rate. All this is going to calculate your interest and principal paid per year. Inputting real estate taxes, this merely is for tax deductions and other information such as when you want to sell that real estate and is the mortgage interest only or not. You could come down here for portfolio information. Whether you want to adjust the returns for inflation, I suggest you do. And some people want a different return when you're old. When you're old, maybe when you are 80, you will start to take down the risk of your portfolio and have lower returns. Then we can put in different portfolios, different IRAs, different taxable accounts. Their portfolio value assumes returns over inflation, whether they are qualified or not, and who they belong to. And then we put other information down here for the taxable portfolio. What percent of the portfolio do we get annually in interest, dividends, and gains that affects our tax numbers? All the inputs are here on one page. Then we can go to the outputs page. Here's our first output page. We'll start with the top left, inflation I've assumed 0, and since I've assumed low inflation, we're also getting low returns. And here's the starting portfolio value. Now what we can see, the first thing that stands out is visually, this page gets darker and darker as you go down. The point is that what most people do is when they see this, they go to the very bottom right. Do I have money when I'm 100 years old, 40 or so years from now? This couple has over $1 million, and then they would be apt to say, well, I'm done, we're all good. The point of the shading is to show that as you get farther and farther out, things get less clear. And the truth is that the number that is the most incorrect on the whole page is the number in the bottom right. So we don't want to focus on that, and we use this shading to focus our eyes on this period. 10, 15, 20 years out is really what we should be looking at. Are we on pace for that? That's really the best we can do. As we can see, we have the years forecasted going out. each individual's age going out. I've set the maximum ages to 100. And then we have different inputs and outputs. The inflows and outflows will depend on what we put in the prior screen. We did not fill out all the possible cash coming in, so everything is not showing here, nor did we input all the possible savings. What you put in the inputs will show up on the outputs. But we can see here we have a pension, 2 Social Securities, and an eventual real estate sale. So we can see total income coming in every year throughout time. This couple has said they want to spend $160,000 to fund their life, but they have to pay taxes on their portfolios. So we can see the tax number here, and then we can look at the total needs. This is what they need to generate in order to live their $160,000 lifestyle. When we go to the final set of columns, portfolio data, if you need $184,000 and you're bringing in $40,000, your portfolio draws $144,000. Portfolio draw is what's coming out of your portfolio every year. And then we get to portfolio draw percent, which is probably the most important output on this calculator. And we can see that it is color-coded. If the portfolio draw is green, you are likely not drawing enough. You have more flexibility to increase your portfolio draw. If your portfolio draw is red, it means you cannot do that portfolio draw for long. A lot of people will have red for brief periods of time, and for this client, it starts when individual number 1 is 95 years old and they have over $2 million. That's probably going to be okay for them. If it's unshaded, if it's neither green nor red, that's a reasonable and normal portfolio draw percentage between 3 and 6%. And then we have their portfolio balance over time. And this gives us a snapshot for what their cash flow future looks like. And we can run different scenarios with real estate sales or not, and different spending assumptions to see how the scenarios change and how the decisions we're making affect how the picture looks over time. The next output we can look at are the charts. These charts merely show in chart form all the numbers we saw on the earlier section. The first chart is portfolio draw, so we can see their draw over time. Red means you can't continue to do that for very long. There are no greens here. This year actually they had negative portfolio draw, or they were adding to their portfolio due to a real estate sale, but sometimes you will see green, which means you have more flexibility to take higher draws. And we can see the gray numbers between 3 and 6% that shows a normal, reasonable draw. Then we can see portfolio assets over time. Declining is reasonable, normal, and healthy as long as the rate of decline is not too fast. Here we can see the IRA versus taxable assets. Due to RMDs, the IRAs always trend towards 0, while when you're 70, your RMDs are only about 3.7% of your portfolio. If you live to 110, you will have to take out 50% of that portfolio per year. So IRAs always trend down towards 0. And then we can look at the forecasted RMDs over time. This is one of the largest drivers for most retirees' taxes. And we can see how that RMD trends over time. The next page we can look at are tax details to see in detail what's driving this client's taxes over time. Often a lot of good conclusions and advice can come from just looking at your tax forecasts over time, especially when you're comparing 2 different scenarios and what happens to somebody's taxes over time. The last thing we're going to look at are forecasted tax tiers for this client. And looking at the forecasted tax tiers can often lead to some nice actionable advice. Now when we're looking at this, if we look at tax tier 1 and 2, they're taxed at 10 and 12%, not a large difference. But when you jump from tier 2 to tier 3, you go from 12% to 22% in taxes. That is a big difference. And when we look at this client, it's typical for clients to be in tax tier 1 and 2 for a while, but what bumps them up often over time to higher tax tiers are those RMDs. Those are taxable events. And as we saw earlier, those RMDs tend to rise over time. So for this client, we can see that there are 2 years where they're going to be in tax tier 2 before jumping up to tax tier 3. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity for 2 years. Do we want to take more from the IRAs than is needed? And we can take that money for 2 years at 12% before we jump into tax tier 3 when we're going to be taking that at 22%. So it gives us some rationale for maybe wanting to take money from IRAs earlier at lower tax rates. And we can look at the future and get an idea of what's going to happen and are there changes in our tax tiers over time, looking for opportunities to provide actionable advice. And that concludes our walkthrough of the cash flow forecaster.